Hello and welcome to Soul Family Chat, where we envision new possibilities for a new earth. I'm Guy Harvey, your host. And if you'd like to be notified of future shows, please hit the subscribe button below and check the notification bell. It's my great pleasure to introduce Noreen Dillman. Welcome, Noreen.
Thank you, Guy. I'm happy to be here today.
Noreen practiced law for 14 years before starting on a journey of health and healing. She studied the ancient system of health, Ayurveda, and she became a natural food chef. That sounds yummy. And she is currently studying for a master's degree in Ayurvedic Medicine at Maharishi International University, which is in Fairfield, Iowa. And Noreen is also the creator and producer of the Healthy, Peaceful podcast, most recently renamed Ayurveda with Noreen. Welcome.
Thanks, Guy. I'm happy to be here today.
Great. I'd just like to start out with a really basic question. What is Ayurveda? And do you say Ayurveda or do you say Ayurveda? Ayurveda.
Well, with Sanskrit, you can say it both ways. Both are correct, Ayurveda and Ayurveda. Ayurveda is an ancient system of wellness. You can say healing, but I like to use the word wellness. From India, it originates from India. It's about 5,000 years old. It derives from the Sanskrit word Ayurveda. The Veda is knowledge, the books of knowledge, and Ayur is life. So it is the science of life is Ayurveda, the literal meaning. And really, its practical application as well is the science of life.
And how old is Ayurveda?
It dates back more than 5,000 years. It originates from India, but it has universal applications. It's not, culturally, it's oriented in India, but it is spreading rapidly in the US, and just like yoga, because it's really the state of our health in the US, that people are really searching for more natural means of healing without significant side effects.
Are there some similarities with Chinese traditional medicine?
I actually don't know I don't know the precise history, but I think Chinese medicine derives from Ayurveda, and there's definitely similarities. I don't claim to know an awful lot about Chinese medicine.
Okay, very good, very good. And this journey you began, you were an attorney for 14 years, and then you transitioned and you started studying Ayurveda and yoga. You became a yoga instructor, is that right? And then eventually led you to this master's degree program that you're studying at Maharishi International University. So can we just go back a little bit, like what happened? You're practicing law, and that's quite a dramatic change from being an attorney to being a natural food chef.
It is, and some things are difficult. Use the word inexplicable. Some things are difficult to explain. I think there's situations in your life where there's a perfect storm of events. And when you look back on your life and you think, well, gee, a year earlier, I had no idea this was going to happen. I didn't see it coming. But then in hindsight, things are percolating in that direction. It's funny because since I left the law, which was in 2008, it was 14 years ago, I had this Jyotish reading, and when I told him a little bit, this was like maybe like 2012, 2013, I had this reading, and I told him that I left my career and what I had been doing. And I think he said I was going into Saraswati. So
can you explain, just 1 second, can you explain what a Jyotish reading is?
Oh, a Jyotish reading is the Vedic astrology.
Okay, very good.
It's astrology, but it's specifically Vedic astrology.
And it's from the same. It's actually the same family of knowledge as Ayurveda.
Right, the Vedas.
Yes.
The books of knowledge. Yeah, I mean, when they say books of knowledge, the Vedas were cognized by the rishis, so it was oral
Hmm.
transmission.
And
Um,
rishis are sort of wise sage men,
the
wise sages,
yes, yeah, they see they're so
seers.
highly evolved that
Yeah,
they're
seers.
seers.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So I had had this Jyotish reading, and he said that well, things were percolating for me way before I actually made the leap from kind of a more traditional, conventional life, going, you know, headfirst into the world of wellness and Ayurveda and natural foods and healing and all the things that I subsequently pursued. So yeah, so that was percolating. It was already percolating. And like I said, I like the word inexplicable because some things you're just receiving messages from the universe, I feel, and it's not necessarily logical. So I guess that's the place to start for me. But on the other hand, I do want to say that um, the kind of law that I practiced was called elder law, and lots of people they'll say, "Well, what's that?" Um, and so I really did see, without being a medical professional, I saw the worst of the worst of how people were grappling with many chronic diseases. So I became very interested in finding another way. And it really started with my clients and their families and the stress that they were under that really speared my curiosity, you know. So and then I went on a trip to Hawaii, and people have told me this about Hawaii. It was in 2008, and it was a business trip. And during that trip, I didn't attend any business meetings. It was the convention or the conference. It was for attorneys. It was about 10 days. Um, to me, that was a sign that it was no longer fresh for me. I was no longer interested. And in some ways, certainly since then, but I've lived my life that way. I mean, that can be precarious as well, because sometimes the freshness isn't evident initially, but it no longer felt like I wanted to inhabit that world. And I think that's another thing that happened for me that can happen for a lot of people in transition. Call it midlife crisis, but it can be a quarter life crisis. It is a situation where, in some ways, you want to have this adventure of inhabiting a world that's completely different than the world that you've known. So I think that was happening for me, and certainly the journey that I've been on since then. It's definitely a world that I would not have inhabited if I stayed behind the desk, so to speak. So yeah, that's a little bit about my experience or my recollection of it at the time.
Yeah, I'm interested in these transitions because I know a lot of people, some of the people listening may be in a maybe more kind of traditional avenue of employment, and they want to transition into something more creative where they're creating their own reality based on their passion and what they're aligned with. And I know like financial aspects of it are also kind of challenged. Was that did that ever come into play for you? Like probably an attorney does reasonably well, financially. Was that a challenge for you to sort of go and be a natural naturopath warrior from being an attorney?
Definitely. Well, I had, not only was an attorney, but I founded my own law firm. So I had my own business for 7 years. So I was an entrepreneur. No matter how you slice it, first and foremost, no matter what your profession is, even if it's a professional business, you're an entrepreneur. You have payroll, you have staff, you have, all those pressures. But I always felt like I had the Midas touch when I was in that world. So I think I had a lot of confidence that no matter, and Midas touch, it's everything turns to gold. So I had the confidence that no matter what I did, it was going to be, I was going to land on my feet. Didn't quite turn out that way. So I will just say the journey can be precarious, but there's an opportunity for growth, but certainly, and the other thing is, if you're going to set out on a journey like that, you make decisions. Like I remember the first time when I was contemplating studying Ayurveda, it was back in, I started studying Ayurveda in 2010. I studied with Dr. Ladd at the Ayurvedic Institute for about a year. But I made that decision really the year before that, or sometime in the beginning of 2010. And I had this very fancy condominium in West Hartford, Connecticut. And I thought, do I want to go back to work? It was time to think about going back to work because I left in 2008. If I'm going to support this lifestyle that I had to make a decision. It was crossroads. Or do I want to study Ayurveda? So I made the decision, I'm going to study Ayurveda. Now that, for me, it doesn't have to be that way for everyone, but for me, that meant letting go of a lot of material things.
Sure. I mean, I was going to ask you, did you simplify?
Yeah. I mean, the condo was sold. All my possessions were sold. I basically went to New Mexico at that time in a just drove. Well, I think my car was shipped cross country and I flew there, but I didn't have anything. I rented furniture in New Mexico, in the apartment that I had there. So, you make those decisions. So it's a matter of asking yourself, and fear can come in and fear can paralyze. There's no doubt. And then people aren't able to move forward. I remember when I decided to leave the law firm, there was an attorney on the phone and I said, well, I sold my practice. I mean, I was lucky. I did sell my practice. So I had a buyout for a number of years. But I mean, an attorney on the phone said, well, he really didn't like what he was doing and he wanted to leave. And I said, well, why don't you? And he just couldn't fathom that question.
Sure.
That question was like, what are you talking about? I can't possibly leave this. But, he just, so those transitions it's an opportunity for growth, but it's not always easy.
And you have children. Were the children of an age where that was something that you had to take care of, obviously, while you were doing this transition? Well,
I was fortunate. My youngest graduated from high school. So I left my job in 2008. I left my business in 2008. And then my youngest graduated from high school in 2010. So it was in 2010 where I hung out in Connecticut until 2010. Well, we spent a couple of summers in Paris, but that was just for fun. And then in 2010 is when she went off to college, and so I fulfilled my parental role.
Sure.
And that's probably another time I don't know how it is for men, but for women, I think it's a time of, okay, this has been fun. I did 20 years of raising children. It was wonderful. And, what do I want to put my heart into now? That feels as fulfilling.
Sure. I think that when people make a transition like you did, everybody's circumstances is different. Some people have more kind of maybe, startup material resources, cash to play with to help them get started. Some have less, some have older children, some have younger children. But there are examples all over the world. People do it no matter what people do, which is always amazes me. I've been watching this television series, The Jarrells in Corfu, based on the famous books of Gerald Jarrell, about a mother in the 1930s that took 4 children. She was a widow, to the island of Corfu with no electricity. And I think that's why people are truly inspired by that series and those books, is that was incredibly radical to do that in the 1930s, just to bog off to an island and with 4 kids and your widow and a small pension. I mean, I just love those. I love those stories, those examples. Anyway,
it takes. It's like my younger daughter has a tattoo. It's on the back of her neck, on her spine, and it's in Latin. It says, "Fortune favors the brave."
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, yeah.
Okay. Just tell me, as a natural food chef, can you, did you notice when you were practicing being a natural food chef, did you notice how this was helping people? And did you see anything kind of dramatic changes in people because they changed the way they were eating?
Well, actually, I want to just tell, I'm going to just a little aside here, a little story about the school I went to study. I mean, I was fortunate, I had a few resources at the time. So I was able to go to culinary school in New York City. So, food in New York, I mean, that was just, what a combination, what an opportunity. And it was a culinary school founded by Anne Marie Colbin, called the Natural Gourmet. It still exists, but it's part of a larger culinary school now. And she was a pioneer in natural foods. She came to New York from Argentina. And her main book was Food and Healing. And she used, similar to Ayurveda, similar to macrobiotics, she used the Chinese 5-element theory. So the emphasis was mostly on plant-based foods, and it was definitely on whole foods. Okay. And, there was a big emphasis on the energy of food, But I always find that in my life that when I look back, there's already things that happened that brought, there's reasons why I got there. Several years later, because I attended culinary school in 2011. Several years later, I got together with an old boyfriend, and I was in his home, and I looked at the bookshelf in the kitchen, and there was a book, and it was actually a book that I recognized from the time that we had been together, which was like 10 years before. And it was by Anne Marie Colbin, the founder of this culinary school. So I thought, oh my God, and that book was in my home. And I remember looking at it like, this is so strange. What kind of foods are these? Seaweed, sea vegetables, brown rice, because I was eating the SAD diet at the time. So it was just funny to see that so many years later, that the book that I thought was really weird, really strange, and was wondering why he even brought it into the house. Now I was in her culinary school,
By the way, what is the SAD diet? I mean, I have an idea.
The standard American diet.
Okay, standard American diet. Okay, it's sad.
Yeah, standard.
I was going to say
diet.
It's burgers and fries, but okay.
Yeah. Well, when I went to culinary school, I had been studying Ayurveda for almost a year at that point, but I became interested in the food aspect of Ayurveda, which is a very, very big part of Ayurveda. But certainly, if you're just thinking about food, you're not going to heal. It's so multifaceted, healing and wellness. But I became interested in the food aspect. So after studying Ayurveda for a year, I veered off and decided to really focus on food and healing. And really have circled back to Ayurveda 10 years later. But my real interest was I became like a wellness explorer.
Mm-hmm.
I was trying to find, it's kind of like the pioneers trying to find the frontier, the final frontier of food and wellness. You know, I worked in raw culinary school, raw vegan. I lived and worked in a macrobiotic center. I cooked at Alice Waters' restaurant, Chez Panny. You know, so I was just really, I'm not quite sure what was propelling me, but it was like I was searching for the secret.
No, I mean, I think
I was searching for the brass
I think
ring.
everybody that goes on these journeys has this phase of where they just devour, they're just, you know, opening every book, and these days it's maybe every YouTube video, but they're just sort of devouring the subject, trying to find, you know, you'd be looking for something and you kind of go mad a little bit. I mean, I had a phase like that in my life, sort of more around understanding, sort of awakening of consciousness, of wanting to find, just understand my own experience, because the path that everything that was on wasn't giving me all the answers. So I was like, you just get like you say, just like hungry for any way you can find some information that gets you closer to what you're searching for.
Yeah, well, looking back on that journey, one thing I did, yes, I devoured a lot of information, but I put myself in places. Mm-hmm. You know, I lived and worked in about 14 different places, which isn't unusual for a natural food chef, somebody who's doing mostly plant-based foods. But I really wanted to be in the presence of people who were, well, call it intellectually curious, wise. They embodied, you know, it wasn't just the act of cooking. Like when I lived at the Kushi Institute, the Macrobiotic Center in Western Massachusetts. I got to work with Alex Jack and Ed Esco, who were natural food pioneers. They were instrumental in ensuring that, you know, brown rice in California was non-GMO, and they were working with some of the major grain growers in California. And so they were actually, the interest had to do with cultivating peace and coming through food, coming to peace and cultivating world peace through the way that we approach food. So those were the kinds of things. It doesn't mean that I couldn't get very caught up in making the most beautiful creation. And there's a lot of creativity in food as well. But, you know, you could bring that into any medium. But it was really an opportunity to work with people who were, you know, like in California, I worked with James Sant, who was the director of Living Light Culinary. And for those in the raw food world, he's like David Wolf. He knew everything. He used to be an artist. So just having the opportunity to work with that energy, you know, that was just fantastic. I got to do that.
So, what a wonderful experience. And from that period of your life, you were working as a natural food chef. You came back to Ayurveda, and I think when we were talking, you know, before the show, you actually started a podcast about Ayurveda before you. Well, you'd already done some studies, but you started a podcast about Ayurveda, and there's kind of a story behind that, how that led you to studying at Maharishi International University.
There is. Yeah, thanks for asking that, Guy. Thanks for asking that. By the way, and just let's say the name of your podcast again. I know I said it in the intro. Sure. Well, it started out in my podcast. I birthed my podcast I know the day because it's my Aunt Eileen's birthday. She's 87 years old. September 18th of 2020, I birthed my podcast. And that was, we were 6 months in the pandemic at that point. I was supposed to be working in New York and my job was canceled. So I was in LA and I wasn't working. And LA, anyone who lives there knows that, or anybody who's visited, it's got this creative energy. You get there and you have to create something. That's how I feel in LA. So I thought, well, you know what? I had started listening to podcasts. I enjoyed them. I could definitely, instead of binge watching Netflix, I could binge listen to podcasts. So I thought, why not try it and just see, at least I'll learn something. Maybe I'll learn a little bit about the technology or whatever, So I decided to start a podcast. And I called it the Healthy Peaceful Podcast initially. And I literally just changed the name a week ago. But the Healthy Peaceful Podcast was based on a book written by Michio Kushi, who brought macrobiotics from Japan to the US on the East Coast. And it was his book, which was co-written by Alex Jack, who I work with, was called One Peaceful World. So I called my podcast the Healthy Peaceful Podcast. And actually Alex Jack has a series of books. He's a Renaissance man. He can research or write anything, and he has a series of books it's a new series on that there are actually peaceful societies. So he's still working feverishly on world peace. So that's why I called it the Healthy Peaceful Podcast. And I didn't start out talking with people. I find that the interview format was fun. It was much more enlivening if I was talking to a guest than if I was spewing something. Some people are great. They can do those solo casts. But I didn't feel like I wanted to do that. So I started profiling guests, people I knew in the macrobiotic community. And eventually, I started coming back to Ayurveda after 10 years in the spring of 2020, because this is going to sound very cliche. But to me, I started re-listening to Deepak Chopra, and he was the only person who made sense to me. And I started thinking about Ayurveda and thinking about moving in the direction of Ayurvedic food. That was one of the reasons I went to LA. I was going to start an Ayurvedic food business with a chef in LA. He's one of the co-authors of the book Eat, Taste, and Heal, Johnny Brannigan. And that didn't pan out, but as a result, I was doing the podcast and I actually interviewed Johnny. He told me about, I had heard of TM. It's funny because I recently found a piece of paper that I
TM is?
Oh, Transcendental Meditation, which is Maharishi's, the founder of Transcendental Meditation and was instrumental. Okay. Yeah. So I found a piece of paper written 10 years ago about a business plan that I had, and it's one thing on there was learn TM, which is really funny, So anyway, Johnny planted the seed I didn't realize that Deepak Chopra was a student of Maharishi. So I was listening to Deepak Chopra, who I hadn't listened to in years. Then Johnny, we were going to start an Ayurvedic food business. I thought I was going to learn about Ayurvedic food. I interviewed Johnny for the podcast. He talked a lot about TM and meditation. I didn't know anything about MIU or the shorthand for Maharishi International University in Fairfield, Iowa. But there was Johnny, there's Deepak Chopra, Johnny, and next I had a favorite book about Ayurvedic cooking. It was called Heaven's Banquet by Miriam Hospodar. And when I looked at the cover, because I tend to buy books and then I give them away and then I buy them again if I need them or want them. And I recently repurchased that book, and on the cover it talked about 500 recipes of Maharishi Ayurveda.
Is it still in print?
Oh.
Heaven's Banquet?
Yeah, well, you can find the used copies. I don't know if you can get new copies now, but it's definitely, you can get it on Amazon.
And Johnny's book available as well? Because that's a fabulous book.
I believe it's available on
both of those books.
Yeah,
both of those books you've mentioned are fabulous starting places for people that want to get into Ayurvedic cooking, I think.
They're wonderful resources, both Eat, Taste, and Heal, and it's written by a physician, an Ayurvedic practitioner, and a chef, the chef being Johnny Brannigan. That's an excellent book. And then also Heaven's Banquet, Maharishi Ayurveda by Miriam Hospodar. Well, anyway, I contacted Miriam Hospodar. I was pretty bold when I started my podcast. In some ways, I'm more shy now. I know that's hard to believe. She was very gracious, and she said, absolutely, she will be a guest. But during the course of our interview, or shortly thereafter, she says, well, why are you doing this series on Ayurveda? And I said, well, I want to learn more about Ayurveda. So it's the best way to learn. And she said, well, no, it's not actually the best way to learn. You should get your master's degree at Maharishi International University in Ayurveda. I said, well, okay. So as a result, I decided to put the application in since the fee was only $20. What did I have to lose? I did get accepted, but I had no idea if I was going to do this or not. But I had asked one of the admissions counselors if I could speak with an alumnus, and she set up a Zoom call. But in the meantime, I was trying to get a very close culinary teacher in New York, Rich LaMarita. I was trying to get him on the podcast and kept avoiding me. I was persistent. When I finally did get him on the phone, I said, where you been, Rich? How come you haven't been in touch? And he said, now remember, I just asked to speak to a student or an alumnus about their experience at MIU in the Masters of Ayurveda program. And here I had Rich on the phone. He said, I just went back to school. I'm doing the master's program in Maharishi Ayurveda at MIU. I said, what? So I just decided, that was too strong of a sign. And he said he loved it. So this was coming from somebody who I absolutely trusted. So I said, not only am I going to enroll in this program, even though I knew that school was going to be difficult for me at this point, whether I could really settle into school. The nice thing is the program is part-time, it's online, but I decided for me, I needed to come to where the university is located, which is Fairfield, Iowa. Energetically, that's what I did. And actually I did that physically as well. But so it was really the story of three chefs.
I like that.
And that was within a period of a couple of months. So within 2 to 3 months, those things happened. And by March 1st of 2020, I was here in Fairfield to start the next leg of the journey. And to really, because I think what was happening to me in the culinary world was I was doing a lot of food preparation, and that's not what I wanted to do. And I also realized that healing is much broader than food. That it's happening on so many levels. And you can have the perfect diet, but if you haven't addressed underlying issues, it's not going to help. It won't harm, but it won't help. So that's why I came back to Ayurveda, to get serious about wellness and healing.
Can you tell me some of the things that you're learning in this Ayurvedic program? Maybe you could just give some examples, or you could give an overview. What does it look like? I mean, I know there's different things in Ayurveda. Like, do you learn pulse diagnosis, self-pulse diagnosis, and things like that? And you learn about diet. What are all the various things that you learn about?
Well, the program is so broad, and you can take Ayurveda. What I love about Ayurveda is everything is Ayurveda. The universe is Ayurveda. So you can take it in any direction that you want. And you can really take this program in any direction that you want. The first year is really learning. I'm in the second year of the program. I'm halfway through. But the first year is really the fundamental principles of Ayurveda, which is really going to lay it's the foundation for everything. And I like to, many people think about Ayurveda as a rigid set of principles. And yes, there are principles, but I don't believe that Ayurveda is intended to be rigid. Ayurveda encourages adaptability and flexibility. And it really opens your awareness to both your subtle state of balance and imbalance. So many people would think about the word dosha or talk about the word dosha and not really know what it means. So to me, Ayurveda is about cultivating your awareness.
Okay, so you're going to explain dosha now so people know what it means.
Well, there's multiple ways that you can talk about dosha, and most people don't talk about it this way, but it's really, the dosha is, in some ways, it's whatever your current state is. Like it represents the imbalance. Okay. So many people will walk around and say, well, I'm a pitta, I'm a pure pitta, I'm kapha pitta, but it also
so what are the
three?
I mean, the three principal doshas. Most people have heard of these.
Well, there's three doshas.
I know there's combinations, but
of course, the three principal doshas, and most people when they're talking about doshas are thinking about Ayurveda is really personalized medicine. So it looks at your unique, how you came into the world, how you were birthed. Your unique mind-body constitution.
True, yeah.
And that's
I know it's oversimplified, but people talk in terms of body type, right, in Ayurveda, like Vata.
Sure. Your
Vata,
mind-body
Pitta,
type.
Kapha.
So there's Vata, Vata, Pitta, Kapha. Each of the doshas is, the beautiful thing about Ayurveda is nature's medicine and nature's awareness. So Vata consists of two elements, air and space. Pitta is, let's see, I better not get this wrong.
Yeah, your teachers are watching.
Kapha is, let's see, Pitta is mostly fire, and Kapha is water and earth. So it's a combination of elements, and it's your mind-body constitution at birth is what most people think about the doshas. But it really is, the dosha is what's happening currently and really in Ayurveda, you want to always be coming back to your unique mind-body constitution, which is in Sanskrit, your prakriti, your birth constitution. So that does not vary through your lifetime.
Yeah, I understand. And I understand
What
also
does
from Vedic
vary-
astrology, you can actually determine what the person's prakriti, what their birth body type is. I mean, that's in your natal chart, I believe.
Yeah, I haven't heard that, but that's probably true. It's reflective of the overall principle of Ayurveda, of the interconnectivity of, everything's happening on a cosmic level. So it's, the macrocosm coming into the microcosm, into this birth, this human life. And as we practice Ayurveda, the beauty of it is, and as we evolve and we practice regularly Transcendental Meditation, talking about Maharishi Ayurveda, we start to tune into the subtle imbalances that Ayurveda teaches us to attune to and to notice. And when we're able to notice, we can easily bring ourselves back into balance, into our natural mind-body constitution, where we're most harmonious. But when we choose to ignore those subtle imbalances that start to percolate in our lives, in Ayurveda, that's referred to a couple of different ways. I loved an interview that I did with an Ayurvedic teacher and practitioner, Sultan Salah. He teaches at MIU, where he said, in Ayurveda, there's one cause of disease. And I love that. It's so simple. We don't have to look at all these multiple causes. There's one cause, and that is ignoring the body's intelligence. So it's kind of like, we know that, being on the computer 6 hours straight without getting away from our desk is a bad idea, but we ignore it. And then we wonder, then we'll question, why am I feeling restless? Or how come I'm not sleeping properly? Some of those things. How come I'm not feeling relaxed? My nervous system's on overdrive. So I just love the simplicity of Ayurveda. But if we've been doing certain things for years, it's kind of like the unprogramming. It's the peeling. And Ayurveda shows us the way to do that. So yeah, that and like I said, I don't like to think about Ayurveda as a rigid set of principles. It's more cultivating the power of attunement so that we can have perfect health. Something that we rarely talk about in the US is perfect health. Knowing that we have the capacity for that, and livening the body's and the mind's inner knowing, inner intelligence. These are the beautiful things about Ayurveda. And that's why I'm just waiting for Ayurveda to take off. It's still in virgin territory in the US.
And I mentioned earlier about self-pulse diagnosis. This is a diagnostic tool that doesn't really exist certainly doesn't exist in Western medicine. And I mean, there are different kind of intuitive diagnostic tools in other alternative natural health practitioners, people looking like the iris and things like that. But can you tell me about the pulse, and is that something that you learn in the master's program that you're studying?
We do. What I love about the master's program is we don't wait to learn the pulse. The first week we start learning the pulse. So we don't wait till in the program, they don't wait until you know everything else. And then by the way, let's learn the pulse. And we start by doing self-pulse. The self-pulse is very useful on a number of levels. one of the main things is it enlivens, like Transcendental Meditation, it enlivens the body's inner intelligence. So just by doing the pulse, the self-pulse, you're enlivening the body's capacity to heal, because Ayurveda is known as a system of self-healing.
Okay, so self-pulse is
so
reading
pulse,
your own pulse, but it's not just reading one pulse, is it? There's more layers to it.
No. Yeah, there's multiple layers in the pulse.
Okay.
I am not an expert in the pulse. I'm a student of the pulse. There's various things that the pulse can tell you. You know, you want to look at the pulse and think about, well, what is the overall, how does, read the pulse innocently. Those are the instructions that we start with. Instead of having all these, it's like a metaphor for the rest of our lives. We have all these concepts that we use to describe what it is that we're feeling. We're so much in our head. But the first instruction is to read the pulse innocently, which actually is really hard to do, you know? And then, yes, there are layers of the pulse. There are fingers that the pulse is a plethora of information.
Can you show what it looks like just on the screen when you read your pulse?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's different. You're gonna again. Everyone know I'm a student of Maharishi Ayurveda. So basically, you've got your three fingers, and you feel the pulsation, slight indentation. You have your Vata finger, which is the index finger. You have your Pitta finger, which is the middle finger. And then you have your ring finger, which is Kapha. So those are the places where you're feeling the qualities of Vata, Pitta, Kapha. And they're described differently. Vata is described, usually they use animals to describe the snake, the frog. So it's, it's a process. And then you have multiple layers and the pulse diagnosis in Maharishi Ayurveda, pulse diagnosis is used in a number of different schools of Ayurveda. Not all. It is different the way they teach it in Maharishi Ayurveda. It is different. So pulse diagnosis is not, across all the schools of Ayurveda, is not universally taught. So, yeah. And it's not the same set of principles for all schools of Ayurveda.
Sure.
Regarding the pulse. Yeah.
I mean, I've taken a few courses.
My understanding
in pulse diagnosis, and I mean, one thing is that it's like you said, it's like meditation. It's very calming just to take the pulse. As soon as you put the three fingers on there, I start to calm down. I guess it creates that loop. I mean, the consciousness is present with the physiology, with the body. I think so much like we're out in our senses most of the time, taking in all these things and the computers, the world, sounds, visuals. When we close our eyes and put our fingers on the pulse, it's really tuning into the body and consciousness.
Yeah, and I think that when the Ayurvedic practitioner takes his or her client's pulse, that's why it's so important for the Ayurvedic practitioner to be, to be really embodying wellness. So when they take the client's pulse, that's a very personal act right there, and there's consciousness flowing between the practitioner and the client. So it's more than information gathering. It's also starting the healing process as well. So, the pulse is multidimensional. There's no doubt. And my understanding is, and I've heard stories, that the most experienced Vaidya's, they can tell everything from the pulse. They know your past lives. They know.
What is a Vaidya?
The Vaidya would be the Indian, usually Indian, but an Ayurvedic doctor. Somebody who's very experienced and very evolved as well. So.
There's some great stories about the famous Vaidyas.
Yeah, I haven't experienced that myself. I did have my pulse taken by Dr. Ladd, Vasant Ladd in New Mexico. So that was, he asked me if I ate a lot of carrots. Not sure yet. Probably wasn't telling that from the pulse, but anyway. But yeah, so I've heard that a lot of information is transmitted to an experienced pulse taker.
Is there, in the program that you've been studying so far, was there one aspect of it that was your favorite?
Well, I like the way they structured the program, because my understanding is that the first 2 semesters are the fundamental principles, and I like that because everything is on the back of those fundamental principles. I mean, so in some ways, perhaps the most important things are happening in the first year. But the way they structure it after that is they structure it in accordance with the elements, moving from the most gross to the most subtle. So like the second year starts with the earth element. So that would be the musculoskeletal system. And then the water element, which is the cardiovascular system and the renal system. My interest is more in the more subtle aspects of Ayurveda. So I'm waiting for more to be revealed. And I'm looking forward to that.
And you're interested in that?
I don't get that interested.
Like the connection between consciousness and how that manifests in physiology and.
Yes. Because it's really been my own experience in my own personal life as well that I'm really most interested in the nervous system. And because, I do think that, I don't have a medical background. I'm not a doctor or a nurse or, I don't have a Western medical background, but I do feel that most imbalances, if they haven't progressed too far, you can quickly address by starting with the mind and the nervous system. And they'll go away, And I think the herbs they're kind of like the icing on the cake. And the food is the icing on the cake too. But getting to those subtle areas of imbalance. And I also like Ayurveda says that everything that works is medicine. So it doesn't exclude anything. And it's not, but it's also not a pill for an ill. It's a system that requires stepping up and taking personal responsibility, which isn't easy. It's easier to pop a pill.
Sure. I think that natural medicine, to some extent, has just expanded from Western medicine, where you just continue to do what you're doing and you take the pill, but you feel better now because it's a natural pill as opposed to, pharmacological pill. Did I say? I don't know if I said that right, but.
Yes, like most recently I was sitting with a friend who was talking about kind of a perpetual itch. Now, don't laugh, but it's true. Okay. But he's got all these Ayurvedic herbs now that he's taking, which is great. It probably will alleviate symptoms. But why this itch? You know, what's the cause of the itch? You know? Yeah, so it's, I mean, he and I did go to a restaurant, and I realized he eats there a lot, and I realized I felt so lousy the next day, and I said, well, if he eats there every day, it's probably contributing. You know, so it's, I guess when you're accustomed to feeling sick and tired, you sometimes don't realize that there's another way, you know, and that you don't have to just alleviate symptoms. You know, that could be short term, the alleviating the symptoms. That's short term until you are you're really able to get to the underlying imbalance. But what I love about Ayurveda combined with, you know, other things that people do as well, yoga, pranayama, which are all aspects of Ayurveda really, is you can really heal.
Yeah.
You know? The breathing exercises. Yeah. So, but yeah, so.
For people that are beginners, maybe they don't know much about Ayurveda, do you have any suggestions where to start? I mean, we mentioned some cooking books earlier, but sort of introductory books or resources. I know it's kind of some of the introductory books have those questionnaires in them where you can kind of do some self-inquiry and find out what your sort of Vata, Pitta, Kapha makeup is and things like that, which I think that's kind of a fun place for people.
Sure.
To start. Do you have any suggestions?
Well, believe it or not, I love the book Idiot's Guide to Ayurveda. It's a relatively new book. It was written by, she has a podcast called the High of Self podcast, Sahara Rose. I think her last name is Qatari, or I don't know. She's easy to find. Young woman. And I thought, well, the book's not going to be very deep, but I love it's a great beginner's guide. It's very approachable, and it has an element of depth in it as well. And I think that's a great place for people to start. She also has a cookbook. She brings Ayurveda modern, which I love. Ayurveda, in order for Ayurveda to be relevant, it has to be practical. And it has to apply to our daily lives. She has a cookbook where it's a vegan cookbook. Now that's kind of unheard of in Ayurveda, which is primarily vegetarian. It's a vegan cookbook, and it's not all cooked food. That's another aspect you'll hear a lot about with Ayurveda is, you know, cook your food. So I think it's a matter of shaking it up a bit, and realizing that, you know, people are going to eat raw food. They want practical things that they can do every day that aren't going to take a lot of time. I do like, when she started our podcast, she's very, very popular. She started talking primarily about Ayurveda, the High of Self podcast. But then it quickly turned into a podcast about Dharma. But really, if you're...
Okay, I'm the Vedic translator here. Dharma? I know what it is. I'm just asking for the
Dharma
people that haven't heard it.
Of course, I know. I mean, Dharma technically means personal responsibility, but most people in the West
okay.
think of it as your life's purpose. But I love the progression of her podcast because it really went from Ayurveda to Dharma, and she does Dharma coaching. And really, if you're doing your own Dharma, Ayurveda enables you to do your Dharma because you don't have to think about your health. You have good health. So that means that translates into good energy. And that translates into being able to project into the world and being able to fulfill your Dharma. If you're not able to fulfill your Dharma,
Yeah, it totally
there's
makes sense
imbalance that
because
exists.
if we're following our path, following what we're passionate about, what we feel is our purpose, it's more kind of sailing downhill, right? If we're doing something that we don't like and we don't feel it was meant for us, we're kind of pushing uphill, and it makes sense that how that would affect your health.
Absolutely. Absolutely. When you start to follow an Ayurvedic, in Ayurveda, you hear a lot about daily routines and seasonal routines. And, for Americans, that sounds terribly boring. Americans don't like routine, or they might follow routine, but they don't like to talk about routine. And they don't want to be told about a routine. But when you start having, so I prefer to call it daily practices and seasonal practices. And these are things that you cultivate with Ayurveda. But with these things, you see a cumulative effect. These small daily habits, like walking at sunrise. I mean, most of us don't get out at sunrise, but get out early in the day. There's ojas in the air. You're imbibing all of that. Ojas is that, kind of the elixir of existence, the bliss. It's that finest, when you're in perfect health, then you have a lot of ojas. It's that radiance. When somebody walks in the room, if they have a lot of ojas, They also have that sattvic quality. There's a certain harmony that they embody. They're not overly distracted, and they're not, I don't want to say overly relaxed because maybe we need more of that, but they're not lethargic. They're not, couch potatoes So when you do these simple things like the morning walk, you set the stage for the day. And that's what Ayurveda is all about. It loves morning routine particularly. You're setting the stage. The morning walk, you face the eastern sun, and the ojas. But in the West we can say, well, you're getting you're activating vitamin D. All of these things we can equate to a Western.
Is ojas
but
like?
I think the
is
other
ojas
thing
like
that I like
force?
about a morning routine. Yeah, well, you think about life force as ojas technically in Ayurveda, it's like that finest product of digestion. And, they call the dhatus, the tissues, the 7 dhatus, and then ojas is like the 8th dhatu. So if everything is assimilating properly, because that is a problem that many people aren't assimilating the nutrients because of poor digestion. So ojas is that finest level, the finest, everything. If you're properly nourished,
Ayurveda has so much subtle.
it's
like you're saying, the subtle knowledge is really vast. Like what you were just talking about. I know Ayurveda is very strong on. It's all about digestion, having a strong digestion. If you can't digest, then you can't get the nutrients. And I think even Western some Western approaches to natural medicine, or like for example, raw food, is that I think most people could agree today that if we analyze raw food versus cooked food, there's more nutrients in the raw food, but not everybody can digest the raw food, and therefore they may not get the benefit from it. Speaking as a non-expert. And I'm not here like to judge raw or cooked or anything like that. I think there's incredible value to all of it.
Sure.
And I'm a campaigner against food terrorism, which is, dogmatic views about different types of foods and diets and systems. But I do like how Ayurveda has a more subtle understanding, more than just, this food has more nutrients, therefore,
well, it's a different
10 pounds of it a day and you'll be healthier.
That's right. It's a different paradigm. It's a completely different paradigm. In the West, first of all, in the West, you can't say, the U.S., I'll just speak to the U.S., that there's so many different diets that we don't want to be diet dictocrats either. You said dogmatic.
Food terrorist. I said food, yeah. So, we don't want to be a food terrorist.
Food terrorist. Right. And, talking about diets is almost as dangerous as talking about politics. So, people are I did a podcast on the emotional aspects of food. We have a relationship with food. It's just like we have a relationship with money. And it's a reflection of the relationship. It's an outer reflection of the relationship with ourself. So, first it's about becoming friends with our food, because we can have a love-hate relationship with certain foods. And then in terms of nutrients, Ayurveda, you don't hear a lot about nutrients, but what you do hear about is assimilation, and that obviously has to do with nutrients. So if the digestion is poor, like you said, Guy, if raw food's more difficult to digest. So if you have poor digestion, in Ayurveda they call it the digestive fire, Agni. Everything starts with Agni. And everything has to be digested by our Agni. And if you think of the image of a fire, it can't be burning too strong or it can't be too weak. Otherwise the fire will go out. If it's burning too strong, everything will be lit on fire. So it has to be, it's kind of like Goldilocks and the Three Bears. It has to be burning just right. And that's where Ayurveda helps us. First we're able to identify, maybe, because sometimes we think, I digest my food. Really? Mm-hmm. What does that mean? If you're really digesting your food, you wake up in the morning, you run out of bed. You're ready to go. You have limitless energy. You have blissful mind. Ayurveda's definition of health is so beautiful because it just doesn't talk about the healthy body. It looks at all the healthy aspects of our body. And then our mind full of bliss. So, do you ever hear Western medicine talk about mind full of bliss? No, you don't. So, there's just there's just so much. It's the depth of knowledge that's there. Is just so profound and so important to people's lives. So, putting in a lot of terminology that Americans don't understand. You know, even when we talk about Agni but they understand bliss and they understand energy and they understand living with ease versus disease. And all those terms are Ayurveda. Energy, bliss, living with ease. So the more accessible that we can make Ayurveda, it's like, you know, it's like yoga, where they say, oh, you know, that's not really yoga. You know, I first walked into yoga about 25 years ago. And it was to fix I had a pain in my neck. I strained my neck or my shoulder. So I thought, well, I tried everything else. Let me try yoga. It doesn't matter how I walked in the door. And I feel the same way about Ayurveda. That if it's a dosha quiz that somebody's doing, even though that's really just a very superficial and surface aspect of Ayurveda,
that would be that's like a body type quiz.
You know, if they're buying body type quiz, if they're buying an Ayurvedic toothpaste or they're looking at an Ayurvedic herb, you know, ashwagandha is, you know, all over the place now. Turmeric. Yeah. Spices. If they're, you know, having a particular tea, Tulsi tea, that's all good, because what it's doing is it's creating that curiosity. And and the inspiration, and if they feel good, they want more, they want to learn more. Yeah, so I think the accessibility is really important. Mm-hmm. And meeting people where they are, you know.
Sure. What are your plans when you graduate? What are you going to do when you grow up? Yeah.
Well, I've already grown up several times, but I'm either preparing for my next lifetime, or the way my life works now, because I'm way beyond the quarter life crisis, is I don't have goals. I just move closer to my bliss. I intuitively move closer to my bliss. And that's the way that I aspire to live my life now. That's what inspires me now. And what I'm doing with my podcast is now known as Ayurveda with Noreen on, you know, YouTube, as well as iTunes, Spotify, and wherever you listen to podcasts, is I'm helping people get curious about Ayurveda. And I'm bringing out people into the world who they're out there. They have visions for Ayurveda, and they're actually out there bringing Ayurveda out into the world. They're bringing healing into the world. So by me profiling, you know, I try to do it weekly. It doesn't always happen. But by me committing to my podcast, I'm helping to bring healing energy and these wonderful people out into the world. So that's one thing that I hope to continue, if it continues to make sense. I'm also working on designing a bag. And the first bag is about Ayurveda. And again, you'd say, gee, Noreen, why are you doing that? You're not a designer. Well, everyone's a designer. Everyone's a creative. And the reason I'm doing it is I want people to ask, well, what is that? I want people to get curious about Ayurveda. So it's just intended to spark conversation.
That's great.
It's not intended to give like a list of things for people to do. So that's some of the things that I'm doing currently with Ayurveda, and just, like I said, I don't have grand goals. It's more of moving closer to my bliss.
No, I like
Thanks for asking.
how you express that. And if people would like to join the conversation with you, obviously they can watch your podcast, and I know you shared some links with me, so we'll put those in the description for YouTube and Rumble and wherever this show goes. Is there any what's your preferred way if people want to reach out to you? I mean, we'll put the link. It'll be in the links anyway.
Yeah, I mean, people can always email me. My email address is comes from my former chefing days. Plantsrock, PLANTSROC.
Plants do rock.
@gmail.com. And they can. They definitely do.
Yeah, that's great. So, I really enjoyed this conversation.
Okay.
And I think, like you were just saying, it sparks the conversation. I appreciate the insights that you gave into different aspects of Ayurveda and the suggestions for books and cookbooks for people to start. So there's a lot of different things, if you're listening, that you can sort of dabble here if you're new to Ayurveda, or if you're more advanced. You might consider taking the path that Noreen has taken. So that's just wonderful. And I've studied quite a bit of Ayurveda in my life, but just hearing you talking about it, like your passion for it, really kind of enlivens it for me. And if there's one thing that you said that I'll remember and that I'll refocus on is that early walk in the morning. That's such a powerful thing. That's great.
Yeah, it really is. It really is. So, well, thank you, Guy. This has really been a real pleasure. Thank you so much for having me as a guest today on Soul Family Chat.